but so did working class white Americans. They were rural, they were suburban, they were agricultural, and yet they found themselves also in a system where some form of labor slavery was necessary for survival. I had some reflection this morning about 3 a.m. and got up and thinking about Miss Betsy Ross, an upholsterer who put the first 13 stars on the American flag. Legend has it she was visited by George Washington. Miss Betsy has largely been credited with designing the American flag, and she must have been excited on July 4th, 1792, because the Bill of Rights had only been part of the Constitution for 6 months. There are days when I wonder how she must have felt to have never voted in her life. I wonder how Miss Betsy felt in 1820 with the Missouri Compromise. The Missouri Compromise was a series of agreements passed by the U.S. Congress to address the issue of slavery in the newly acquired territories. It admitted Missouri as a slave state and Maine as a free state, while also prohibiting slavery in the remaining Louisiana Purchase territories north of the 36-degree parallel. This compromise aimed to maintain a balance between slave and free states in our new national government. They called it the Union. Therefore, since Miss Betsy Ross did not die until 1836, she had not had those 2 stars added to the American flag yet. 1 free state and 1 slave state. Miss Betsy Ross, she was in it too. But when she died on January 30th, 1836, she did not live to see the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854 that allowed the residents of Kansas and Nebraska to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, effectively repealing the Missouri Compromise, which had previously prohibited slavery in those territories. This act led to intense conflict, known as Bleeding Kansas, as pro-anti-slavery settlers clashed over the issue. Both states were admitted to the Union, like animals going into Noah's Ark, 1 slave and 1 free. Miss Ross did not live to put those stars on the flag. African American history did. Miss Betsy Ross was not alive on April 12, 1861, at 4:30 a.m. when the first shot of the American Civil War had begun and resulted in 11 stars deciding they no longer wanted to have anything to do with Miss Ross's flag. The dates of state secession from the American Civil War were as follows: South Carolina, December 20th, 1860, Mississippi, January 9th, 1861, Florida, January 10th, 1861, Alabama, January 11th, 1861, Georgia, January 19th, 1861, Louisiana, January 26th, 1861, and Texas, February 1st, 1861. Following these were Virginia, April 17th, 1861, Arkansas, May 6th, 1861, North Carolina, May 20th, 1861, and Tennessee, June 8th, 1861. From December 15th, 1791, to the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, there are 71 July 4ths that African Americans did not celebrate July 4th. Therefore, the Negro had known 242 years of unfreedom and 244 years if you include the people of Texas, which became Juneteenth. There are 6 months from June 19th, 1865 to the adoption of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Therefore, 243 years of unfreedom. There are 3 years from the adoption of the 13th Amendment to the citizenship rights of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution in 1868, an amendment to the Constitution that is so debated today that it threatens the very structure of our Union itself. And there are 86 years between the adoption of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution before the Supreme Court of the United States does anything about its implementation in the states in Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954. Therefore, as Americans, all of us, regardless of our race, sex, or class, have grown impatient. We've experienced, on one side of the equation or other, 329 years of unfreedom, and another 10 years to get the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 11 years to get to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and 14 years to get to the public accommodations legislation after Brown versus the Board of Education. Therefore, the entire nation has a mental condition over the significance and the meaning of July 4th. Not one of us agrees on the significance of the date. It's not all tied to July 4th, 1776. For not only did Black women not have the right to vote, white women did not have the right to vote. Hispanic women did not have the right to vote. Indian Americans did not have the right to vote. All of us found ourselves in the same condition on the same day. Therefore, it's a mental condition. When I think about what the big, beautiful bill does, a $10 trillion tax cut, the closing of rural, urban, and suburban healthcare facilities. When I look in the eyes of Americans, regardless of their race, their sex, and their class, and just as sure as I am on this microphone, I know they are on Medicaid. That Blue Cross Blue Shield does not cover them. That as a former United States representative, that I am covered by Blue Cross Blue Shield IPO. And I'm covered by it for most, if not all, of the rest of my life. I don't believe I've worked any harder than a farmer who tills the soil, who picks the soybean, who tills the corn. I don't see my life as any different than the package deliverer at UPS or Amazon or the flight attendant who cleans up behind us on aircraft when we spill things or have accidents. I don't see myself any differently than street sweeper, the sanitation worker, who used to be called a garbage worker. But Martin Luther King argued that there was no dignity in referring to people who handled garbage as garbage. That comes from the Indian caste system. He said we are sanitation workers, keeping our streets and our neighborhoods and our communities clean from disease, looking out for those of us who throw things out of our window and don't have the decency to pick up a bottle or throw things in the garbage can. Someone comes behind us, our neighbors, and assumes the responsibility for that which we do not do. July 4th. Some people will be celebrating liberty and freedom. Elon Musk certainly will be, and certainly Mark Zuckerberg will be. But for millions of Americans who will lose their health care, they find themselves in the tragic condition of some form, maybe not racial-based slavery, but I know they're not working harder than the men and women that I've had the privilege of meeting and spending time with this past Sunday. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show, and when we come forward, more on the meaning of July 4th. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. In the next hour of our show, we will be joined by Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, who has one foot in the pulpit and one foot in the courtroom. He's both lawyer and both theologian, and I look forward to his opining on my thinking about July 4th. Now, I've studied all of these dates, all of these July 4ths. Every single July 4th in American history is different. No two July 4ths are the same. July 4th, last year, agree with it or disagree with it, Joe Biden was president of the United States. It was a different spirit energy. July 4th, 2025, President Donald John Trump is president of the United States. It is definitely a different spirit energy. It's the same date on the calendar, but these are different dates in terms of human spirit energy. But I want to talk for just a few moments in this segment about the turning point in this national remembrance. And I do this in reflection of the courage of my father and a wonderful family, an 83-year-old woman who gave me a hug in a place that I ventured into that I didn't know I would be greeted so wonderfully and so warmly. It would be July 4th, 1863. The North met Robert E. Lee's troops at Gettysburg. Had Robert E. Lee been successful, he was planning on circling Washington, D.C. with the Army of the Confederacy and seeking an unconditional surrender of Abraham Lincoln's government. But at that battlefield, where Mr. Pickett's charge did not work, where for 3 days between July 1st and July 3rd of 1863, two great armies who no longer could resolve their problems politically met on a battlefield of that war. And therefore, July 4th, 1863 was unlike any other July 4th in American history. You see, I'm not just focusing on the last 250 years of July 4ths. I'm including all 342 July 4ths that predate the Declaration of Independence. Because that story matters to our interpretation of what July 4th means. More than 60,000 men were killed in that battle or severely wounded between July 1st and July 3rd. I've been to that battlefield many times, including during the last presidential election. Because, in a real sense, I don't believe God was in Pennsylvania on July 4th, 1776. Not disrespecting women, not discriminating against Africans and African people in slavery. I don't believe the God of the Exodus was in Philadelphia. I don't believe God was in New York, the writing of the Constitution of the United States. But if I can prove that God exists and that God is real, and I can, from my perspective, he was on that battlefield in Gettysburg. On July 4th, 60,000 men, both Northerners and Southerners, found themselves on a great battlefield of that war. In November of that year, with the Gettysburg dead still unburied, in the sweltering heat of Pennsylvania, the smell of decaying Americans could be smelt as far away as Baltimore, Maryland. And yet Lincoln, with the courage, came to Gettysburg to say these words. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We've come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that this nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work for which they fought, have thus so far nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be dedicated to the great task remaining before us, for that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to the cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we are highly resolved that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of, for, and by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the face of the earth. It is that July 4th that led to the beer that you're going to drink on Friday. That July 4th led to the ribs that you're going to eat. It's that July 4th that Abraham Lincoln showed us that we could transform our national existence from a slave society to a society that was inclusive of women, that reached out to the stranger on the Jericho Road, that promised hope and opportunity for every single American, regardless of their geographical or racial happenstance. It was that America that it is impossible mentally to move beyond, because since the Gettysburg Address, July 4th came to mean something new. It did not mean what Jefferson wrote on July 4th, 1776. It did not mean what July 4th meant in 1787 when the Constitution was written. It did not mean what July 4th in 1791 meant when the Bill of Rights was written. And we celebrated each of those rights. At least some of us did until the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. July 4th meant something else for all Americans after Brown versus the Board of Education, because the Supreme Court said we are going to try to make the American experiment work where we can live together, where we can die together in foreign wars, where we can serve together, where we can build something that human history has never seen before, a more perfect union. And so I share with us, on this July 4th, what kind of America will we be on Friday? What kind of America will we be on July 4th, 2026? What kind of America will we be on July 4th, 2030? And how many nations around the world who've copied our Constitution are struggling with the idea of what constitutes human liberty? And the choice is between liberty or slavery. And I don't mean racial slavery. I mean slavery for everybody. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, some final thoughts on July 4th. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. We are celebrating, commemorating, thinking about the meaning of July 4th, and also expressing our gratitude for what it means to be alive in a nation where we can actually reflect upon it. So many people don't want to talk about it. They don't want to reflect upon it. We go to the Bible and we reflect upon a horrific story in the Exodus, the story of slavery for 400 years for Jewish people, and the intervention of God in the path of the Israelites that culminates in a promised land, a land of opportunity. For the early Americans, they considered America to be the new Israel. In their Bible, their Old English Bible, that land was called Palestine. In our corrected American King James Version of the Bible, it's called Israel, the Promised Land. But Americans saw themselves as founding on these shores a new Israel. And the closest we've ever become to the new Israel is a path that began on a battlefield in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I reflect now upon August 28th, 1963, when Martin Luther King Jr. delivered, and I excerpt this speech, referring to July 4th in Gettysburg and the Emancipation Proclamation. He says this: 80 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree came as a great beacon of light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to the end of a long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro, the working class white, the woman, people of different sexual orientations, they're still not free. 100 years later, the life of all of these people is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, all of these people live on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of vast seas of oceans and material prosperity that Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos get to traverse across in very large yachts. But 100 years later, he says, we are still languishing in the corners of American society and find ourselves exiled in our own land. Some of us are wearing red hats, and some of us are wearing blue hats. So we come here today to dramatize a shameful condition that on one side of town, the American people will be celebrating a July 4th that they think begins on July 4th, 1776. Other Americans on another side of town remember the 156 July 4ths before Jefferson was born. And their celebration is different. One group of Americans will be celebrating a different July 4th on this holiday without health care, without Medicaid, diminished Social Security, while people continue to walk and traverse great oceans of material prosperity. Dr. King then continues, in a sense, we've come to our nation to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, Dr. King said they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. That there is no difference between Pontiac and Tilton and Harvey, Illinois and Markham, Illinois. It's not us versus each other. It's us versus downtown. It's us versus Silicon Valley. It's us where our jobs are being replaced by robots. It's us where they're telling us now we don't need a college education anymore. We should be doing manual labor regardless of our race or our sex or our class. All of us in a tragic movie find ourselves in a time warp going back to a system that we had long since abandoned as Americans. And so, like Dr. King, I too have a dream. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summer of all of our legitimate discontent is not going to pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality for everybody, however you choose to define it. Leave me alone. Stay out of my business. Stay out of my bedroom. Stay out of my hospital room. Respect the relationship between me and my doctor, me and my lawyer, me and my pastor. Respect that. I have a dream. When all of our red hats will be taken off and put down, and we take off our blue hats and put them down, and we try a little harder to see the humanness in our neighbor and to recognize there is not something inherently wrong with any of us, but the system that keeps producing the same condition over and over and over again needs to be transformed. No, I'm not a democratic socialist. I'm a constitutionalist. In 2001, I wrote a book called A More Perfect Union. I advanced new American rights in the United States Constitution. The right to health care of equal high quality for all Americans. If you live in a rural area or a suburban area or an urban area, you should have a constitutional right to be able to check into a hospital and receive the highest quality of care that the nation can offer. The same kind of health care that the President of the United States gets, the same kind of health care that members of Congress get, and yes, the same kind of health care that former members of Congress get. All Americans deserve the same kind of care. Basic human subsistence ought to be able to be part of the American dream. The right to an equal high quality education. It is not an accident that some schools have gymnastics and Olympians come from certain high schools and wrestling from certain high schools, and some of our schools have no coaches whatsoever. We need the Constitution to have faith in a Constitution that when we sue the federal government or the state government, these kinds of facilities will be built in our communities wherever we live, regardless of our geopolitical happenstance. America has issued all of us a bad check. It has come back marked insufficient funds. And yet America continues to find the money to give tax breaks to people who don't need them. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come back, it's Wealthy Wednesdays with Reverend Dr. Todd Urey, 1 foot in the pulpit and 1 foot in the courtroom. We're going to catch up on July 4th together. And I'd like to get his take on his thinking about my thinking. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. when we come forward. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. My very special co-host in this hour is S. Todd Yeary, who is the principal of the Yeary Firm, a Maryland-based litigation and government relations firm, and also serves as the senior pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church of Baltimore and affiliates. Dr. Yeary is also the former chief executive officer of the Rainbow Push Coalition, the international human rights civil rights organization founded by my father. Dr. Yeary's social justice work includes having served on the national board of the National Action Network from 2015 to 2021, past political action chair for the Maryland State Conference of the NAACP, as co-founding principal of Community Churches for Community Development, Inc., and as founding principal of SALT, which stands for Strategic Advocacy and Legislative Think Tank, a faith-based public policy collaborative that works on regional and national empowerment strategies impacting disaffected communities. He is often called upon to facilitate creative conversations that solve challenging public policy problems. He is a civil rights attorney and my very good friend, but most importantly, he has one of the most impressive minds and spirits of anyone in public life today. Hi, Reverend Dr. Yeary.
My brother, you grade me on the curve all the time. I will take your class any day.
Well, I listen, I'm just a student. I should be sitting right there learning from you. Dr. Yeary, the significance from your perspective for the complicated nature of the July 4th holiday. We have about 4 minutes before the break, and we will obviously continue after the opening segment.
Well, July 4th is always a bit complicated for many communities, especially our own. What does July 4th mean to the Negro is still, I think, a poignant question when we look at the current posture and positioning of our communities when it comes to not particularly political relevance, but political respect. We see it on both sides. We see the taking advantage of a very loyal base by the Democratic Party, and then a very overt hostility from the Republican side of the aisle. And so regardless of where you stand in this political climate, quite honestly, the situation for Black people writ large coming upon July 4th is a very tenuous one at best. And so when we come to this notion of celebrating, quote, independence, we also have to make sure that we're not written out of the historical narrative, that independence was not established nor sustained absent a very significant and intentional participation by communities of color, particularly the Black community. And so when we have this conversation, it's not just about independence. It really is about justice. What is the unfinished business of independence that still perplexes us and confronts us to this day? And I think that's the part of the conversation where it's more than cookouts and hangouts. It's got to be about righteous demands and significant public policy shifts so that the declaration can really be one that's built on credibility and not just nostalgia.
You know, increasingly, Dr. Yeary, I find in this experiment, including my life experiment, which is exactly what I think every life is, that on two sides of town, there are two different celebrations. There are two different holidays, and that we've not arrived at the beloved community that Dr. King fought for, the world house that he fought for, that Johnny Mack often talks about on our program. And as I travel the length and breadth of the nation, particularly when I was campaigning in 6 to 9 states during the last election, I mean, I found myself in rural Pennsylvania, but I could have been on the south side of Chicago or in the south suburbs. I could have been anywhere in the nation where traditionally African Americans may dwell, that they have far more in common with working class and poor whites than they do alone.
Well, that's the reality of the moment, which makes our current political predicament all the more perplexing. When you mention the World House, I certainly have to pay tribute to Dean Lawrence Edward Carter, Sr., the Dean of the Chapel at Morehouse College. As today, he has announced his retirement from that
Oh,
position effective next year.
wow.
And so for 5 decades, he has been shaping and framing what civic engagement and human sensibility looks like in those who would serve in communities of faith across the country and over the years. And so when we think about the World House, Dean Carter often talks about this World House. It frames it in a human rights perspective. And oddly enough, this administration would make claims about human rights somewhere referenced in this bill, albeit somewhat tongue in cheek, if you will, but would withdraw from the Human Rights Council and Commission of the United Nations. And so when we think about how much work has to be done, I think we have to go back and make sure we're talking about the same thing. Because when poor people, period, poverty is a condition, it is not a color. When we look at the fact that there are far too many who have far too little to be able to address the essential needs of being able to survive, independence in America comes with an obligation, not just a celebration. And I think we get too caught up in the grill and the hot dogs instead of the policy and the obligations. And we see it going on right now that this president would push for this big, beautiful bill to come to his desk so he could sign it actually on the 4th of July, while not fully appreciating the meaning of the 4th of July and the obligation that comes with it.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, Reverend Dr. S. Todd Yeary on Wealthy Wednesdays. This is the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Reverend Todd Yeary when we come forward. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. You're listening to The Politics of Our Faith with our special guest, Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary. We're discussing the meaning of July 4th. And Dr. Yeary, welcome forward to the show.
Listen, I'm not feeling very collaborative today. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I think Marvin Gaye is guiding my sense of where we are.
Well, let me help you a little bit right here. Because something you said in the previous segment got me thinking, since I've been studying all of these July 4ths and the different meanings of each of them over time. And that's this. This is the first July 4th in the history of the United States where Congress is going to pass a piece of legislation, possibly, and get it to the desk of the president, where the focus is no longer on all men are created equal. Its focus bankrupts the government, making equality between all men and women equal an impossibility in America for 100 years. It will define July 4ths as long as we are alive. That's the kind of debt that it creates. No president has ever used the occasion of July 4th to change the sacred nature of that momentous decree in the Declaration of Independence to exacerbate wealth inequality between America and all of her domestic neighbors. And I do mean Black men as well as white men, white women as well as Black women, and whatever persuasion or whatever pronoun you choose to define yourself by, that ain't my business. But the wealth inequality will forever define our Independence Day as the central core of who we are as Americans going forward. Dr. Yeary?
Well, I mean, that's been the fundamental challenge to the Declaration of Independence, Independence Day, and then what gets enshrined in the Constitution. That when we hear the courts talk about originalism and how the Constitution is to be interpreted, it's not just how you read it, but who reads it and who was able to have standing to be able to read it. That's the fundamental question in the Dred Scott decision, that he did not have standing to bring a case in federal court because he was not viewed as a citizen. The other issue is the dignity of the person. Person has a legal status in the law. Well, corporations are persons under the law, according to the Supreme Court. And so now you have corporate interests claiming supremacy and priority over the needs and concerns of regular, everyday people, folks who are doing the best they can to make ends meet, to hold on for one more day, to be able to take care of their kids and raise a family in dignity and remain connected to community. And so the masses of people have gotten swept up in this prioritization of what many would argue was the defect in the original framing, that the Constitution, when we say we the people, well, who's the we and who gets to be people? When it says all men are created equal, well, we know that excluded women. They did not really have legal standing that they could assert. But also who could be a man, right? That's the issue. And so we are confronted with this regression, this revising of history that has forced the Constitution to be more inclusive over the centuries. And now this administration, in one fell swoop, in less than a half a year since taking office, is bringing us precariously close to taking us back to 1776.
I'm sitting here with my mouth wide open because that's exactly what it feels like. And while many of us are celebrating with beer, barbecue, festivities, loud music, smoke a little marijuana. I've never done that, but there'll be plenty of it smoked over here in South Shore. Have a great time, have frolic, hang out at the beach. The fact of the matter is we are looking at a redefinition of the very foundation of what it means to be an American. It is very well funded. It has a long view of what this story will be, so that it's not just limited to a president's term. It has the potential to shape the body politic itself, meaning that Democrats will either be a party that is always fighting to recover an ancient definition of equality, while the economics of our society will reflect an increased authoritarian, oligarchical, billionaire class that is above the law, while the rest of us are responsible for finding funding for our sewers, our drains, our pipes, our bridges, our interstates, our roads. It seems to me that the American people are going to be asked over the next several decades to dig even deeper and pay different forms of taxes to accomplish just the basic maintenance that the federal government itself attempted to do by building a more perfect union.
Yeah, there's this notion of taxation. Some taxes are paid in money, some taxes are paid in mortality. And so when you pull the lifeline from beneath the feet of those who need just a little bit of help to be able to make it a bit further, when the federal minimum wage still remains $7.25 to this day, and the living wage required to support one adult and one child across the country, some states kind of carved out California, New York among them because of their exceedingly increasing cost of living. But let's just say you got to work 3 full-time jobs just to be able to make it as one adult and one child to deal with basic needs. When you look at the importance of Medicaid, when you look at the numbers of folks who rely upon just a bit of government assistance to be able to maintain this sense of dignity, this question that comes out of this bill that adds more work requirements when many have argued we're already at full employment in the current marketplace. Then the question becomes, how do we critique the displacement of field laborers who have often been relied upon from immigrant groups who are coming across the southern border to be able to pick our food and keep our cost of groceries a bit lower? When you're displacing that, when this administration is proposing that U.S. citizens, naturalized citizens, could be deported to a country for which they have no ties, and that could be maintained legally, at least in the current posture from this Supreme Court. We have a whole panoply of issues that make this July 4th probably the most complicated since July 4th became a thing. And that's what we've got to wrestle against and work with to be able to change not only the paradigm, but the outcomes by way of mass action, political action, social action, engagement from Lottie Dottie and everybody, because this might be the last year that we're able to enjoy hot dogs as we know them on the 4th of July.
You go quit right there with my mouth wide open trying to figure out what my next question is going to be. So let me press that a little bit, because Lincoln in the Gettysburg Address says that we are not supposed to forget what they accomplished here, but history will not little known remember what they did here, because he essentially changed the definition of the letter of the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, to the spirit of the matter, to the spirit of the Declaration, that yes, Elizabeth Cady Stanton would amend that spirit by saying, and yes, women are created equal as well. But there is this shaping and this perfecting of the notion that the nation itself is founded upon the principles of equality, that if we're all around a common table, and this is a table that all of God's children can sit at, that this child should not go hungry, this child from this community should not go hungry, this child from this tribe should not go hungry. This child from this barrio, this ghetto, or this trailer park should not go hungry. Work with me here, Reverend Yuri. We're losing the momentum of that sense of spirit energy from the Declaration that Jefferson himself may not have understood, but through struggle and through time, we've actually sought to perfect.
Well, I think you tap into an important distinction that all men are created equal, and then it continues, and are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so there are supposed to be some beneficial outcomes that flow from this notion of equality. And when we don't see the outputs, then that means we have to question the inputs. Some folks take the inputs for granted. We see it in this bill. But for the rest of us, when we start looking at how the government that is supposedly of, for, and by the people only works for some people, and even then, some of the time, we've got to wrestle with this fundamental question: what do the masses of the people who are impacted by these policies do? And it is first, we have to recognize and reclaim our place in the equation. We are not to be acted upon. We are the ones to be able to drive the action that flows from it. And so we should be taking the role, taking notes, paying attention to who's voting against the interests of the masses of the people. And though they may not have corporate money, they do have political power in their vote. And if the masses of the people ever recognize that that is the fundamental math equation, who gets the most votes in an election that determines who represents the people's interest, then I think we can then shift this paradigm and not only get the attention of the political class, but the corporate class that claims supremacy over all other individual interests.
Does that include a different kind of engagement in the 2026 election cycle?
Well, you got 2025 that's not over yet, right? We've got to play the game all across the board, local, state, and federal. We have to remember that the current predicament of the way gerrymandered maps has come to be is that the contract on America, that was called the contract with America, I'm not sure which America the contract was with, that Newt Gingrich came up with in the early 90s in Bill Clinton's first midterm, began to kind of focus on state legislatures and executive chairs in state houses to be able to change the paradigm, because they wanted to control how the maps would be drawn every 10 years. And now that we have found ourselves caught in that predicament, we've now got to figure out, how do we leverage our mass interest across demographic lines? This is not the time to get just focused on me, myself, and I, my three favorite people. We've got to be concerned about our neighbors, and we've got to make this thing work for everybody. I mean, that's the reality of it, because self-interest has to be a collective interest, because they're not just coming for somebody, they come in for everybody to their benefit, and it's not turning out to be good. And we see it very early on in this administration's second try at running the government.
Dr. Yuri, let me in these final 2 minutes before the break broach this question, which I probably believe part of the answer is going to be in the next segment. It seems to me that those of us who have your understanding and this understanding are going to have to take the kind of risks that my father took. We're going to have to go to places where we're uncomfortable, go to places where we speak at people through microphones and through television and through public policy orations and through this and through that, but we don't sit with them and listen. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of listening where you bring cameras and then you start exploiting it immediately to say I was there. I'm talking about that core, genuine, caring friendship that Dr. King felt was beyond political and court-based integration, but the integration of the human spirit at the level of genuineness and concern, at the level of the priest and the Levite and the man on the Jericho road and and the Samaritan, and their disposition towards someone, regardless of the incidence of race, to be able to reach out genuinely. And that's where I saw my father with the farmers. And that's why I saw him milking cows in Iowa. And that's where I saw Dad reaching out beyond international boundaries to make peace. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. When we come forward, a deep insight, a deep look at reaching out beyond our comfort zone into those dark places and bring some light and receive some light. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show on Wealthy Wednesdays with Dr. S. Todd Yeary. He has one foot in the pulpit and one foot in the courtroom, but both feet in reality. Let's start with that. Dr. Yeary, welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
Reality check Wednesday is what it feels like, man. This is some different stuff. What can I tell you? But always good to be with you.
I appreciate you. Doc, can I ask you a question, please, about the question of integration at the level of the human spirit? This care and concern that the Samaritan showed on the Jericho road. But beyond the depth of the story, there's also the untold story that the Samaritan can also be perceived as uh, having everything together in their own life. That let me just flick a coin to a beggar. Let me just patch up a man. But at the level of a genuine care and concern for neighbor. How do we get there?
Well, that's the profound question of the day. But let's remember the Samaritan expresses and displays goodwill without political status.
Mm,
To be a Samaritan meant that you carried a certain amount of stigma wherever you went. And so you were often dismissed and relegated to being irrelevant in changing the dynamics and the impact of what was going on around you. And so when you look at how that parable is told, those who fall higher up on the ranking of who fits within society, they passed on demonstrating and expressing a bit of human concern. It was the Samaritan who had the least to give and probably the most to lose, even though he had some resource. It doesn't mean that he was necessarily wealthy. And it's those that are often limited to the political margins that are relied upon to bring some sense of ethical praxis to how we do this thing called living. And so the Samaritan sets a model, but we also have to remember that the Samaritan brings a sense of humanity, the sense that traveling along that road, whoever the bandit may have been or bandits may have been, to take advantage of the man on the journey could have befallen any of us. And so it
mm,
is this lack of empathy, but also the recognition that we are not somehow excluded from the framework that, but for the grace of God, as we often say in the church, there go I. And so the Samaritan shows a different kind of compassion, a different kind of understanding that says, listen, I'm going to make sure he's taken care of. And if what I have for you now, Mr. Innkeeper, is not sufficient to take care of his needs, I will make sure that I square up with you, but not attending to this man's condition is not an option. And so that's where we find ourselves. This bill, when we talk about this big, ugly bill that does so much for the corporations and does such great harm to those who are at the bottom of the economic rung of society, where rural hospitals and folks who live in the areas relying upon rural hospitals are now facing the reality that they may have to go back to the days when the emergency department was their primary care physician because they couldn't get any other kind of care elsewhere, that the notions that hospitals will close their doors and that folks are going to be left out because they are required to go get work when jobs are not going to be available. That is the reality that we face. And so we have to ask ourselves the question, the thing that you raised before the break is, how do we get back to remembering that politics is really a relationship, what I would call a relationship. Some call it a game, but it's a relationship framework. It is based on and built upon acknowledging and recognizing the common humanity. That's what we learned sitting with and traveling with your father
mm,
in rooms where the first thing he did was he affirmed the humanity of whomever he was having a conversation. Whether or not he agreed with them, that was secondary. The first thing we had to do is build a context for a conversation. That's not what this administration is after. This
mm,
administration is after outcomes that suit those of his choosing, his liking. And if you don't fall within that prioritization, then you may be what my father would call, you might be donkey out.
mm. This question of integration at the level of care and concern, uh, even in our own community, integration takes on this whole myth that somehow it's a failed experiment. And I think that ending legal segregation, right, creates the opportunity for a kind of horizontal and vertical integration of spirit. And I don't think we've ever gotten there. We've been so compelled by what the court says or by what the law says that, if you're having a problem harvesting your crop, I'm willing to help. I mean, I have an extra helping hand. I want to make sure that you have air conditioning in the summer and some heat in the winter, and or you're welcome to come to my house and sit under this fan with me where the air conditioning is presently broken. So and I can't afford to fix it. So that level of care and concern where the young person helps the older man or woman across the street uh, isn't quite the Samaritan story, but there is a concern and a conscience that says, I don't think I can walk too much further beyond what I have just seen with my own eyes without going back and doing something that alters the condition of people the way in which I found them, because I'm not going to get a good sleep tonight thinking about the fact that I left them where they were when I could have done better by my neighbor. Does that make sense that the extra step does matter?
Well, it does matter, but you said you got to think about it. It's got to come
Yeah.
to your consciousness
Yeah.
that the African adage, I am because we are, therefore I am, that the notion of reciprocity is important if you're going to build credible human relationships. But the other part is we get hung up, I think, on a misdefinition of integration. Integration was not just to be able to say we could go certain places with people that had historically left us out. Integration is really along the lines of what we call inclusion in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. I want to fully participate in the operative framework that others claim as their entitlement. And it should not be excluded simply because I am who I am. That was really what was at the core of the first Civil Rights Act in 1866, that said that we, as descendants of formerly enslaved persons, would be able to fully participate in the business of America without being excluded on the basis of what our prior status of servitude may have been. We've got to have that conversation, and that conversation is not just about the changing the appearance of America. It is changing the substance of America in terms of how America responds to the least, the last, the lost, and the left behind. It cannot be. This country will not survive simply by being a country for the entitlement class, where then they get to fight with each other over what the resources would look like. I'm trying to figure out who's going to go to work, how they going to eat, who's going to cook their food, who's going to change their beds, who's going to drive their cars, and most importantly, who's going to nurse their kids.
Mm, mm. I keep having to reflect upon the idea that we don't just live without meaning and without purpose, that somehow this is trial and error. Every life has some experimental dynamics to it, into the thinking that allows our faith to catch up with our politics and to push our politics back and then lean heavy on the faith that that human energy reciprocates and responds to human energy in a way that political energy doesn't. I don't have to wear a hat. I don't have to wear I'm a big Democrat D in order to reach out to people beyond race, sex, and class. And obviously, this is July 4th. I can't think of a better time to think and talk about it. When we come forward, Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary is going to provide us with our word of hope and maybe one or two more questions to continue our final dialogue. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You're listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show.
everything that I need. All I gotta do every day is stop and praise. I am truly amazed by you. Clouds and blue skies, flowers in every hue. If rain falls and birds fly and fish swim the sea, why do I spend my time worrying about me? Stop in the middle of my day to lift my voice and give you praise. Thank you for every breath I take. Stop and praise. Pray and wait patiently. You give me everything that I need. All I gotta do every day is stop and praise. Sometimes I'm so faithless, walking by my side, busy trying to make sure everything goes right. So wrapped up in how I feel, I haven't sought your will. But it's time for me to stop and tell you how I feel. Stop in the middle of my day to lift my voice and give you praise. Thank you for every breath I take. Stop and praise. Pray and wait patiently. You give me everything that I need. All I gotta do every day is stop and praise. Close to you, I can handle what life brings. If I concentrate, just concentrate on you. Concentrate on you. I put my trust in you till the end. You'll be my lover, my God and my best friend. In the middle of my day, rejoice in every breath I take. Wait on you patiently, trust you give me what I need. Stop in the middle of my day, rejoice in every breath I take. Wait on you patiently and trust you give me what I need. Stop in the middle of my day to live, rejoice and give you praise. I gotta wait, Lord, I just gotta wait. Stop, trust you give me what I need. Stop, patiently, you give me everything, everything I got. All I gotta do every day is stop, trust you give me what I need. Stop in the middle of my day. Sometimes it's so hard. Give you praise, and I gotta wait, Lord, I just gotta wait. Stop, trust you give me what I need. Stop in the middle of my day. You give me everything, every breath I take. All I gotta do every day is stop and trust you give me what I need. Stop in the middle of my day to lift my voice and give you praise. Thank you for every breath I take. Stop and trust you give me what I need. Stop.
I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. Welcome forward to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Dr. Yuri is my very special guest. Dr. Yuri, welcome forward once again.
Always good to hang out with you. It's always my great curiosity to see how you're going to strike up a conversation. So I'm glad to be with you.
This is Wealthy Wednesdays, where we discuss the politics of our faith. In some cases, they are one and the same, but there are people engaged in politics who are not of faith. And then there are those of us who find politics as the basis for which we bring about our faith into reality. I mean, that's kind of what it is. So much for some people who separate church from state, and they probably should, probably has no business over in the state at all. But I can't shake my core beliefs for how I feel about humanity, which emanate from my faith, from how I engage the public and how we engage the public. And I don't know anyone who's given more thought to that than Dr. Todd Yuri. Dr. Yuri, let me ask you a couple of questions here, and then we'll get to your closing message. These are dark and dreary times for people who feel helpless with representative government. And I touched upon this in a previous show where Dr. King, who was very middle class, Boston University educated, a preacher, a pastor, extremely articulate, bright, a philosopher, a theologian, a writer, a thinker, and he had to shed himself all of that middle class stuff to suffer with people whom he wanted to deliver from a condition. Too often, our pastors, ministers see themselves as speaking to people from a church and shepherding a congregation. But more often than not, men of the cloth, women of the cloth are not suffering with the congregation, suffering with the people. They find great comfort in being behind the pulpit and all of the adornments associated with the sacredness of the word, but they're uncomfortable engaging people where their pain is. Dr. Yuri, your thoughts on that, and in these final 5 minutes, please include in that a word of hope.
Well, a couple of things. For most of my colleagues, if you think about the average church congregation in America, the average congregational size is somewhere around 50 people. And so the relationships are much tighter, much more intimate, and very often very much unseen. And so the vast majority of shepherding that happens in this country is not happening in mega churches and on TV ministry. It is happening in places and spaces where all you have is the ability to know what your neighbor is dealing with. If we even understand the evolution of Black preaching, when Black preachers preached on circuits, very often the whole joke about having chicken on Sunday dinners, the way the Black preacher would often get compensated was to be able to sit at the dinner table of those he served when he was making rounds in the little towns where he was just trying to preach a word of hope. And so we've gotten so advanced in many ways that we've lost the remembrance of how we made it this far. When we sing in churches, we've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, trusting in his holy word. He's never failed us yet. That part of that has been we've had each other, and we still have each other. The problem is that 21st century existence is focused on trying to create loneliness where there's relationship. We have friends that we've never met in social media spaces so that we can vent in unknown corridors about whatever is ailing us, but we're not able to reach out to the neighbor who's right next door. And so in some ways, we've lost that sensibility. We've abandoned it. But sometimes it takes a good crisis to remind you that the only way you're going to make it, the first Passover, if the family didn't have enough, the other family who had more than enough was supposed to make sure that the other family did not lack. That we recognize that this is a moment where we are called to be interdependent, mutually reliant upon each other, so that we can all get to the same place. And when we sit at table, the beauty of table is the table has to be level. If the table's not level, then you're not going to be able to keep your dishes in place and not be able to keep your food from falling on the floor. And so when we sit in level places, that means we're sitting in a common space, in a common engagement that allows us to have a different level of understanding. And so here's where I would leave us in this moment while we're wrestling with the 4th of July, because we still have a table. The question is, are we willing to sit at it? And if we sit at this table, then I would invoke Frederick Douglass when he spoke about the 4th of July. He says, and I quote, "My business, if I have any here today, is with the present. The accepted time with God and God's cause is the ever-living now." He then writes, "Trust no future, however pleasant. Let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living present, heart within, and God overhead." That this is a moment that we have to remember that we are not alone. Hebrews 11 tells us that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. That hope doesn't happen by appearance. That hope is grounded in imagination. We have to have the courage. Beloved community was not something that was done by a blueprint. It was done by discernment and inspiration. We've got to be willing to carve creatively on the canvas of our hearts and minds so that when we close our eyes at night and dream about the possibilities, if we're blessed to open our eyes again, we don't become discouraged by what our eyes reveal. Sometimes we have to see things as the blind man did after Jesus touched him the second time, as they truly are, not just as they appear to be. There's greatness in you. There's the ability to change the future. And until the 4th of July actually means what they say the 4th of July is intended to mean, we've got work to do, but we are well able. But the clock is ticking and we don't have time to waste.
Wow. Is there a plate that we can pass? Is there a place where we can cash app you, Dr. Yeri? I mean, I'm so excited about what you just said. I can't see straight. I'm reminded in this moment that our Monday contributor, Dr. Teresa Hord Owens, has a new book that is coming out that we are going to be moving on our program called Staying at the Table. Staying at the Table, that we have a place at the table. And as you know, she leads one of the most integrated, diverse, inclusive congregations as an African-American woman of any congregation in the United States. She is the president of the Disciples of Christ Church, both in the United States and Canada, and we are particularly proud of her work. Dr. Yeri, I want to thank you on this July 4th.
Happy 4th of July. Do the work. I appreciate who you are. Keep doing it.
I love everyone. I'm Jesse Jackson Jr. You've been listening to the Jesse Jackson Jr. Show. Until tomorrow.